You probably all know what that means. Someone is knocking. I didn't say that to you, but that is a sign. The sign, if it were this, would not necessarily mean that there's someone at my door coming in. So what is the difference? Signs are at the core of idealist analysis, because it is through signs that human beings are able to share ideas. Where do signs come from? That's an interesting question. But I won't talk about that today. What we will look at is what signs are. Signs are made up of two parts. You can have the sound and the idea. So when I hear, the idea that I associate that with is there must be someone at the door trying to come in. That's a very clear idea that comes from that signifier. Language operates in the same way. When I say k, a, t, that series of sounds, cat, makes me think of the idea of a cat. We have different languages in the world, and we can express the same idea using different sounds. The differences in the sounds is what we call the signifier, and the idea or the signified is what is represented by those signs. Here's a small drawing. Signs, a key part of idealist analysis. Every sign has a signifier, which is the sound or the image, and a signified, which is the idea. If you hear a sound like that does not really tell you anything, at least in English. It doesn't stand for any idea. So that sign becomes a kind of noise. Signs differ depending on the community of people you are in. The key thing about signs is that they have to be created by communities and shared by communities. There are big arguments about where signs come from, or if signs are natural, but the common view, at least the one we will be taking for this class, is that signs do not become normal until a community of people start to share those signs. Pay attention to this as you see how, for instance, the sign of Africa is used. When you think of Africa, what are the associations that come up with that signifier for you? And when someone else thinks of Africa, what are the associations or ideas that come up with that? In the history of global Africa, the kinds of ideas that have been assigned to the signifier of Africa have been very different depending on the community of people who are taking them. This suggests again that there is no one interpretation or one idea of what Africa is. Africa varies depending on the community of people who are using that word. So to ask the question, what Africa is really to ask a question that's a bit misleading, because that question assumes that there is one answer, whereas the people who talk about Africa are parts of very different communities, whether they are in Africa or outside Africa, engaging with Africa. What matters for this course, however, is to look at the idea of Africa that has become very dominant in the global world in which we live in, and look at the processes of writing and creation of images and narratives, whether they are scientific or journalistic or in popular media, that have been most dominant in creating ideas as well as signifiers of Africa. And then we look at the communities of people, or the ideal perspective, that is the gaze, that has been behind the creation and circulation of these narratives. It's useful at this point to think of Africa in a language that you speak that might not be English, and think what associations come up with that. You can also think, for example, of ethnic identities that you have. When I think of being a Swazi, there are very particular things that come to my mind that I've never heard any of my friends who are not Swazi mention if they were not aware of them. My friends that perhaps I met at school who are from China, and some of them from the US, who don't know necessarily what Swaziland means. In fact, I had a roommate once who thought that it was an amusement park. That would never cross the mind of any Swazi if you said the word Swaziland.